The dust of New Mexico territory rose like a copper veil as Zara Reynolds leapt from the moving train, her blue skirt billowing around her ankles as she hit the hard desert floor. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, but fear propelled her forward, stumbling and desperate across the open landscape as the train whistle shrieked its farewell into the distance. It was 1878, and Zara had just made the most terrifying decision of her 22 years. Behind her lay a life she could no longer bear. Ahead, nothing but uncertainty and the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the American frontier. She hadn't noticed the lone rider watching from the shadow of a mesa until his horse's hooves thundered across the distance between them. Panic seized her chest as she tried to run faster, her boots slipping in the loose sand. "Your running ends here, in my arms," a deep voice called out as the rider drew alongside her. Strong hands reached down, lifting her effortlessly onto the saddle before her legs could give way beneath her. Zara found herself pressed against a broad chest, the scent of leather, sage, and sun-warmed skin surrounding her. She struggled against his grip until her eyes met his green as spring grass after rain, set in a face weathered by sun and hardened by years on the frontier. "Let me go," she demanded, breathless from her fall and subsequent flight. "Madam, there's nothing but 20 miles of rattlesnake country between here and the nearest town," the stranger replied, his voice gentler than his firm grip. "And whatever you're running from on that train might be preferable to dying of thirst out here." Zara stopped struggling, the reality of her situation crashing over her like a wave. The cowboy's observation was correct. She had jumped without a plan, with no water, no provisions, and no idea which direction led to civilization. "I'm Grant Caldwell," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "And you've just made the most foolish or the most brave decision I've witnessed in a long while." Zara hesitated before answering. "Zara Reynolds. And I had my reasons." "Always do." Grant nodded, turning his horse toward a distant line of mountains. "Question is whether they're good enough to die for." The setting sun cast long shadows across the desert floor as they rode in silence, Zara acutely aware of the stranger's arm around her waist, keeping her secure in the saddle. Despite her circumstances, she couldn't help noticing the strength in his hands, not soft like the businessmen back east, but capable, marked with scars and calluses that told stories of hard work and harder living. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from here," Grant explained eventually. "You can rest there tonight. Figure out your next move come morning." Zara stiffened. "I can't impose." "Madam, you're already imposing," he said with a slight chuckle that rumbled through his chest against her back. "But I wasn't raised to leave a woman alone in the desert, no matter how determined she seems to end up there." As the horse picked its way across the rugged terrain, Zara's mind raced with the events that had led to this moment. 3 months ago, she had been a schoolteacher in Boston, with a simple life and simpler dreams. Then the letter had arrived from her uncle in Santa Fe, offering her a position at his new school. It had seemed like an adventure, a chance to see the country and escape the suffocating expectations of her parents. What she hadn't known was that her uncle had other plans that included her marriage to a business associate 30 years her senior, a man whose reputation for cruelty toward his previous wives was whispered about even on the train west. "You're shaking," Grant observed, interrupting her thoughts. "Are you cold or scared?" "Both," Zara admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. Without a word, Grant removed his worn leather jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, the lingering warmth of his body enveloping her like an embrace. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "My place isn't much to look at." As they crested a small rise, Zara caught her first glimpse of Grant Caldwell's ranch, a modest cabin with a barn and corral nestled against the base of red rock cliffs. A small creek glinted in the fading light, and a stand of cottonwoods provided unexpected green in the desert landscape. It's beautiful, she said honestly. Grant's silence told her he hadn't expected that response, and something in Zara softened toward this taciturn cowboy who had, quite literally, caught her when she was falling. As they approached the cabin, a dog came bounding out to greet them, a rangy blue heeler with one ear standing upright and the other flopped over. "That's Rusty," Grant said. "Best cattle dog in the territory and absolutely useless as a guard dog. He'd welcome a bandit with the same enthusiasm." Zara couldn't help but smile as the dog circled the horse, barking joyfully at their arrival. It was the first time she'd smiled in weeks. Grant dismounted with easy grace, then reached up to help her down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks despite her exhaustion. "Can you stand?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Zara nodded, then immediately regretted it as her knees buckled beneath her. Grant caught her before she could fall, sweeping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "That jump took more out of you than you're admitting," he observed, carrying her toward the cabin. "I'm fine," Zara protested weakly, even as she found herself resting her head against his shoulder. "Just tired." "And likely bruised from head to toe," Grant added. "Jumping from a moving train isn't something folks walk away from unscathed." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly neat and comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair pulled close. Bookshelves lined another wall, unexpected in a cowboy's home, and simple but well-crafted furniture filled the space. Grant set her gently in the rocking chair and moved to light a lamp. In the warm glow, Zara got her first proper look at her rescuer. He was taller than she'd realized, with broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist. His face was sun-darkened and angular, with a strong jaw softened somewhat by the hint of a smile that seemed to permanently lift one corner of his mouth. Dark hair curled slightly where it fell across his forehead, and those remarkable green eyes regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "You're younger than I expected," she blurted out before she could stop herself. Grant raised an eyebrow. "I'm 30, he replied. "Old enough to know better than to bring strange women home, young enough to do it anyway." Despite everything, Zara laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise them both equally. "I should tend to scout," Grant said, nodding toward the door. "My horse," he clarified when she looked confused. "Then I'll fix us something to eat. You rest." When he'd gone, Zara took the opportunity to examine her surroundings more carefully. The bookshelves held an eclectic collection, Shakespeare alongside practical guides to ranching, dog-eared novels beside books of poetry. On a small table sat a photograph of a younger Grant with an older couple, parents, she guessed, and a framed letter written in a flowing hand. The cabin spoke of a man far more complex than the taciturn cowboy exterior suggested, and Zara found herself increasingly curious about the person who had plucked her from disaster. Grant returned with a basin of water and a clean cloth. "You've got some cuts that need tending," he explained, setting the basin beside her. "May I?" Zara nodded, suddenly shy as Grant knelt before her and gently took her hand in his. His touch was surprisingly delicate as he cleaned the scrapes on her palms and examined her wrists for injury. "Nothing broken," he declared, "but you'll have some impressive bruises tomorrow." "I've had worse," Zara said without thinking. Grant's eyes met hers, a question in their depths that she wasn't ready to answer. "There's a small room through that door," he said, letting the moment pass. "It's not much, but the bed's clean. I'll sleep out here." "I can't take your bed," Zara began to protest. "You can, and you will," Grant replied firmly. "No arguing. Now, are you hungry?" As if in answer, her stomach growled loudly, bringing another unexpected laugh from both of them. The sound broke the tension that had been building, and Zara allowed herself to relax slightly. While Grant prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread, Zara found herself sharing pieces of her story, her teaching position in Boston, her uncle's invitation, the unexpected marriage arrangement she had discovered only when the train was halfway across the country. "So you jumped," Grant said, setting a plate before her. "So I jumped," Zara confirmed, the enormity of what she'd done finally hitting her. "I don't even know where I am." "About 30 miles southwest of Las Cruces," Grant informed her. "But what matters more is what you plan to do next." Zara stared at her plate, the question overwhelming her. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have $7.16 in my reticule, the clothes I'm wearing, and absolutely nowhere to go." Grant considered this as he ate. "Las Cruces has a small school," he said finally. "They've been looking for a teacher since Mrs. Abernathy retired last spring. If you're qualified—" "I am," Zara said, hope flickering to life. "I taught for 3 years in Boston." "Then that might be a place to start," Grant nodded. "I can take you into town tomorrow, introduce you to Mayor Wilson. He handles the school board matters." Relief washed over Zara like a cool breeze. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the cabin walls. "6 years ago, my sister found herself in trouble back east. A man who'd promised her the world turned out to be married already. She wrote to me, desperate and afraid. I sent money for her passage west, but she never arrived." His voice tightened. "I later learned she'd died on the journey cholera took her before she could reach New Mexico." He met Zara's eyes, his own reflecting old pain. "I couldn't help her then. Maybe helping you now makes up for that in some small way." Zara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry about your sister." Grant nodded, his fingers briefly curling around hers before he withdrew his hand and stood to clear the plates. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." That night, lying in Grant's bed with his quilt pulled to her chin, Zara listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night coyotes calling in the distance. The whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, the occasional creak of the cabin as Grant moved about in the main room. For the first time since receiving her uncle's letter with its hidden agenda, Zara felt safe. The irony wasn't lost on her that safety had come in the form of a stranger, a cowboy who had literally caught her when she was falling. She drifted to sleep with the scent of sage and leather surrounding her, wondering what tomorrow would bring in this wild, beautiful land where she had never intended to be. Morning came with the soft sounds of movement in the cabin's main room. Zara blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She winced as she sat up, every muscle protesting the abuse of her train jump. Grant had left a basin of fresh water and a clean towel on the small table beside the bed. Next to it was a folded shirt and a pair of trousers that clearly belonged to him, along with a note in a surprisingly elegant hand. "These might be more practical for riding into town. Coffee's hot when you're ready." Grateful for his thoughtfulness, Zara quickly washed and changed. The clothes swallowed her slender frame, but with the sleeves rolled up and the trousers secured with a piece of rope, they would do far better than her torn and dirt-stained dress. When she emerged from the bedroom, Grant was at the stove, his back to her as he fried bacon in a cast-iron skillet. In the morning light streaming through the windows, she could see details she'd missed the night before. The way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the breadth of his shoulders under his simple shirt, the easy confidence in his movements. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and something flickered in his eyes as he took in her appearance in his clothes. "Good morning," he said, his voice gruffer than she remembered. "How are you feeling?" "Like I jumped from a moving train," Zara admitted with a small smile. "But better than I have any right to." Grant nodded, turning back to the stove. "Food will help. Coffee's ready if you want some." Zara poured herself a cup, savoring the rich aroma. "It's good," she said after the first sip. Much better than what they served on the train. Small comforts matter out here, Grant replied, placing a plate of eggs and bacon before her. Eat up. It's a 2-hour ride to Las Cruces. As they ate, Grant outlined his plan for the day they would ride to town, where he would introduce her to Mayor Wilson and Mrs. Fletcher, who ran the town's only boarding house. If all went well, Zara could have a job and a place to stay by nightfall. What if it doesn't go well? Zara asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since she woke. What if they don't need a teacher after all? Or they won't hire someone without references? Grant considered this as he finished his coffee. Then we'll think of something else, he said simply. One step at a time, Miss Reynolds. Zara, she corrected him. After rescuing me from certain death and sharing your home, I think we can dispense with formalities. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Zara, he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his voice made her heart skip. They set out as the sun climbed higher in the clear blue sky. Grant had saddled Scout and another horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, for Zara to ride. Can you ride? He asked as he adjusted the stirrups for her shorter legs. Yes, Zara assured him. My father believed all proper young ladies should know how to sit a horse, even if they rarely had occasion to do so in Boston. Grant looked skeptical, but helped her mount without comment. To his evident surprise, Zara settled comfortably in the saddle, gathering the reins with practiced ease. My father would be pleased to know his lessons weren't wasted, she said with a slight grin at Grant's expression. Full of surprises, aren't you? He replied, swinging up onto Scout. Let's see if you can keep up. The ride to Las Cruces took them through breathtaking country red rock formations rising from the desert floor, valleys dotted with saguaro cactus and ocotillo, and distant mountains shimmering in the heat haze. Grant pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local history as they rode. That ridge was where the Apache ambushed a cavalry patrol back in '69, he said, nodding toward a distant escarpment. And that canyon leads to one of the best natural springs in the territory. The local tribes consider it sacred ground. How long have you lived here? Zara asked, fascinated by his knowledge of the land. Came out with my father in '63, right after the war started, Grant replied. He wanted no part in that fight, said Americans killing Americans was a sin he wouldn't commit. We staked our claim, built the cabin, started with just 20 head of cattle. A shadow crossed his face. He died 3 winters ago. Pneumonia. My mother had passed the year before. So you've been alone since then? Zara observed softly. Grant's eyes met hers briefly. Not alone. I have Rusty and the horses. Neighbors check in when they can, though the nearest is 12 miles away. Something in his tone told Zara there was more to the story than he was sharing, but she didn't press. Everyone had secrets, herself included. As they approached Las Cruces, the landscape changed irrigation ditches, crisscrossed fields of corn and beans, and adobe buildings clustered around a central plaza. People moved about their business, a mix of Mexican, American, and native faces reflecting the territory's complex history. Grant led her to a modest building with Wilson's General Store painted above the door. Inside, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose was carefully weighing sugar for a customer. "Morning, Mayor Wilson," Grant called, removing his hat as they entered. The man looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Grant Caldwell, twice in 1 month. To what do we owe the pleasure?" Grant gestured to Zara. "Mayor Wilson, this is Miss Zara Reynolds. She's a qualified teacher from Boston, looking for a position." I remembered Mrs. Abernathy's retirement left the school without an instructor. Mayor Wilson studied Zara with undisguised interest. "Is that so?" "Well, Miss Reynolds, you've arrived at a providential time. The town council meets this very afternoon to discuss finding a new teacher before the term begins next month." Hope surged through Zara. I taught for 3 years at the Brighton School for Girls in Boston, she said. I can provide references if you write to the headmistress. That would be appropriate. Wilson nodded. In the meantime, perhaps you could tell me about your educational philosophy and experience while I finish with my customers? For the next hour, Zara found herself engaged in a surprisingly thorough interview, answering questions about her teaching methods, the subjects she felt most qualified to teach, and her views on discipline and moral instruction. Throughout, Grant remained nearby, occasionally catching her eye with an encouraging nod. Finally, Mayor Wilson seemed satisfied. The position pays $30 a month, with lodging provided in the small house behind the schoolhouse. Term begins in 4 weeks, which should give you time to prepare. Of course, the council must approve, but I see no reason why they would object to such a qualified candidate. Zara could hardly believe her good fortune. Thank you, Mayor Wilson. I would be honored to accept, pending the council's approval. Excellent. The meeting is at 3 o'clock. I suggest you rest until then. You look as though you've had quite a journey. Wilson's eyes took in her borrowed clothes and the fading scrape on her cheek with curiosity, but remarkable tact. Outside, Zara turned to Grant, words failing her in the face of such unexpected success. He seemed to understand, a rare, full smile transforming his usually serious face. Told you it would work out, he said, the satisfaction in his voice warming her. I can't believe it was so simple, Zara marveled. Grant chuckled. Simple? Mayor Wilson just put you through a more rigorous interview than most territorial judges receive. If he's satisfied, you must have impressed him. I couldn't have done it without you, Zara said earnestly. You've saved me in more ways than one, Mr. Caldwell. Grant, he corrected, echoing her earlier words. After rescuing you from certain death and sharing my home, I think we can dispense with formalities. Zara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Grant, then. What do we do until the council meeting? First, we get you some proper clothes, Grant decided, glancing at his oversized shirt hanging on her frame. Then food, and perhaps Mrs. Fletcher can offer you a place to freshen up before the meeting. The rest of the morning passed in a whirlwind of activity. The town's small dress shop had several ready-made dresses that needed only minor alterations, which the seamstress promised to complete by the following day. Grant insisted on paying, waving away Zara's protests. Consider it an investment in Las Cruces' educational future, he said firmly. You can repay me from your first month's salary if it matters so much. They ate lunch at the town's only restaurant, where Zara noticed the curious glances directed their way. Grant seemed oblivious, but she wasn't. People are staring, she whispered across the table. Grant shrugged. It's a small town. I rarely come in except for supplies, and never with a beautiful woman wearing my clothes. The casual compliment brought heat to Zara's cheeks, and she busied herself with her stew to hide her reaction. Do you avoid town deliberately? She asked, genuinely curious about this man who seemed so self-contained. Something shuddered in Grant's expression. I prefer the quiet of my own place, he said simply. Town has too many people asking too many questions. Before Zara could respond, the restaurant door opened to admit a striking woman in an expensive dress, accompanied by a gray-haired man whose gold watch chain and polished boots spoke of considerable wealth. The woman spotted Grant immediately, her painted lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Why, Grant Caldwell? She said, moving to their table with deliberate grace. What a surprise to see you in town. Grant stood, his posture stiffening almost imperceptibly. Miss Hartford, he acknowledged with a nod. Mr. Hartford. The older man merely grunted in response, his eyes sliding dismissively over Grant before fixing on Zara with uncomfortable intensity. Aren't you going to introduce us to your friend? Miss Hartford asked, emphasizing the last word in a way that made it sound far from innocent. Zara Reynolds, Grant said, placing a protective hand on the back of Zara's chair. Miss Reynolds, this is Victoria Hartford and her father, Emerson Hartford. Charmed, Victoria said without sincerity. Are you visiting our little town, Miss Reynolds? Actually, I'm hoping to become the new teacher, Zara replied, instinctively disliking this woman but determined to be polite. Victoria's eyebrows rose. How admirable. Though I must say, your current attire hardly seems appropriate for someone who would shape young minds. Grant's hand tightened on Zara's chair. Miss Reynolds had an unfortunate accident with her luggage, he said, his voice level but with an edge Zara hadn't heard before. The dressmaker is providing suitable replacements as we speak. How fortunate she found such a generous benefactor, Victoria replied, her gaze moving between them with calculated speculation. Well, we mustn't keep you from your lunch. Father and I have business with Mayor Wilson. The council meeting this afternoon promises to be quite interesting. With that parting shot, Victoria glided away, her father following without having spoken a word. What was that about? Zara asked when they were out of earshot. Grant's jaw was tight as he sat back down. Victoria Hartford believes herself entitled to whatever and whoever she wants in this town. Her father owns the largest ranch in the territory and half the businesses in Las Cruces. And she wants you, Zara guessed, the woman's hostility suddenly making sense. She wants my land, Grant corrected. The natural spring I showed you on the ride-in? It's on the northeast corner of my property. In a drought year, that water is worth more than gold. Hartford's been trying to buy me out for years. And Victoria thought to acquire it through marriage? Zara surmised. Grant's expression was grim. Something like that. Let's just say she doesn't take rejection well. Will she cause trouble at the council meeting? Zara asked, worry creeping into her voice. Possibly, Grant admitted. But Mayor Wilson has never been fond of Hartford's heavy-handed ways. We'll just have to see how it plays out. The afternoon council meeting took place in the back room of the general store, with 6 council members seated at a long table and various townspeople occupying chairs along the walls. Zara, now wearing a borrowed dress from Mrs. Fletcher that fit better than Grant's clothes, sat nervously as Mayor Wilson called the meeting to order. The routine business was dispensed with, quickly before Mayor Wilson introduced the matter of the teaching position. He presented Zara's qualifications with enthusiasm, recommending her immediate appointment given the fast-approaching start of term. I have serious reservations, came Victoria Hartford's voice from the back of the room. She rose gracefully, commanding attention with practiced ease. We know nothing about this woman except what she claims about herself. No references, no letter of introduction. For all we know, she could be running from the law. Murmurs rippled through the room, and Zara felt her hopes crumbling. Miss Hartford, Mayor Wilson began, while your concern is noted, you are not actually a member of this council. My father is the largest taxpayer in this county, Victoria interrupted smoothly. Surely that entitles us to some say in how those taxes are spent. I merely suggest we verify Miss Reynolds's credentials before entrusting her with the education of our children. More murmurs, these sounding increasingly agreeable to Victoria's point. Zara's heart sank further. I would like to speak, came a quiet but firm voice from beside her. Grant had risen to his feet, his presence immediately drawing all eyes. I've known Miss Reynolds only briefly, but in that time I've observed her to be intelligent, well-spoken, and knowledgeable in matters of education. Mayor Wilson has questioned her extensively on her teaching methods and found her qualified. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. This town has been without a teacher for months. The children suffer for it. Miss Reynolds is here now, willing and able to teach. By all means, write to Boston for her references, but in the meantime, give her the opportunity to prove herself. If she fails to meet expectations, the council can reconsider at the end of the term. The simple logic of his argument seemed to sway several council members, who nodded thoughtfully. Victoria, however, wasn't finished. "How exactly did you come to meet Miss Reynolds, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked, her voice sweet, but her intent unmistakable. "Given your hermit-like existence, it seems an unlikely acquaintance." Grant's eyes hardened, but before he could respond, Zara stood. "Mr. Caldwell saved my life," she said clearly, meeting Victoria's gaze without flinching. "I was traveling to meet my uncle in Santa Fe when I fell ill on the train. The conductor insisted I disembark at the next stop, concerned I might have something contagious. That stop was merely a water tower in the middle of nowhere. Mr. Caldwell happened to be nearby and offered assistance when he saw my distress." The lie came smoothly, born of desperation and a sudden fierce desire to protect Grant from Victoria's insinuations. She continued, building on the fabrication with details that lent it credibility. "He took me to his ranch where I could recover, then brought me to Las Cruces when I expressed interest in finding employment, rather than continuing to Santa Fe. I left my references and luggage on the train in the confusion, but I have written to my former employer requesting duplicates." Zara could feel Grant's startled gaze on her but didn't dare look at him. "I understand your caution, Miss Hartford," she added. "In your position, I would likely have the same concerns. I ask only for the chance to prove myself through my work." A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, one of the council members, a weathered farmer with kind eyes, spoke up. "Seems to me we need a teacher more than we need more arguments. I say we hire her provisional-like, pending those references. My Becky ain't learned a new thing since Mrs. Abernathy left." "I second that," said another council member, a woman with practical clothing and a no-nonsense demeanor. "School term starts soon. We can always revisit if there's a problem." Mayor Wilson called for a vote, and to Zara's immense relief, the motion passed 4-2. Victoria's expression could have curdled milk, but she said nothing further as she swept from the room, her father following in her wake. Outside after the meeting, Grant pulled Zara aside, his expression a mixture of admiration and confusion. "That was quite a story you told in there," he said quietly. "I'm sorry," Zara replied, suddenly uncertain. "I didn't want to explain about jumping from the train. It would have raised too many questions. And the way she was looking at you, I just wanted to protect you from her implications." Grant's face softened. "No need to apologize. It was quick thinking, and probably better than the truth in this case." He hesitated, then added, "Though you should know, Victoria won't give up so easily. She doesn't like losing." "Neither do I," Zara said with unexpected fierceness. "Not when something matters." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them before Mayor Wilson approached with the keys to the teacher's cottage and instructions about where to find school supplies. The spell broken, Grant stepped back, his expression returning to its usual careful neutrality. With the council's approval secured, practical matters took precedence. Mrs. Fletcher offered Zara a room until the teacher's cottage could be prepared, and several townswomen immediately volunteered to help clean and stock the small house with essentials. Zara found herself swept into the town's life with surprising speed, introduced to so many people she could hardly keep the names straight. As evening approached, she realized Grant had been gradually withdrawing, speaking less and watching more as the townspeople embraced their new teacher. When she finally had a moment alone with him, she found him preparing to leave. "You're going?" she asked, unable to keep disappointment from her voice. "Need to get back before dark," he said, checking Scout's saddle. "Coyotes have been after the calves lately." "Oh," Zara said, suddenly at a loss. How did one thank a man who had quite literally changed the course of one's life in the span of a day? "I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done." Grant looked uncomfortable. "No need. he said gruffly. Anyone would have done the same. No, Zara said firmly. Anyone would not have. You're a good man, Grant Caldwell. He ducked his head, avoiding her eyes. You'll be all right here, he said, changing the subject. Mrs. Fletcher runs a respectable boarding house, and the town's generally friendly once they get to know you. Mayor Wilson can help if you need anything. Zara nodded, trying not to show how bereft she suddenly felt at the thought of Grant riding away. It was absurd she had known him barely 24 hours, yet he had become her anchor in this strange new world. Will I see you again? She asked, then immediately wished she could take back the vulnerable question. Grant looked up then, something flickering in his green eyes. I come to town for supplies every few weeks, he said, and if you need anything before that, well, it's only 2 hours' ride to the ranch. It wasn't much, but Zara clung to it. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. Grant nodded once, then swung up into the saddle. Good luck with your teaching, Zara Reynolds, he said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. Then, with a touch of his hat brim, he was gone, riding out of town as the setting sun painted the streets in gold and shadow. Watching him go, Zara felt oddly bereft, as if something precious was slipping away before she'd had the chance to understand its value. But she squared her shoulders and turned back toward Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. She had a new life to build, and the first step was to prove herself worthy of the trust this town and one particular cowboy had placed in her. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Zara prepared for the school term. The teacher's cottage, a snug 2-room adobe structure behind the schoolhouse, was cleaned and furnished with donations from the townspeople. Bookshelves were stocked, a curriculum developed, and class lists prepared for the 27 students who would soon be under her care. Through it all, Zara found herself scanning the streets each day, hoping for a glimpse of a familiar tall figure on a chestnut horse. But Grant didn't return to town, and as her disappointment grew, so did her determination to succeed in her new role. If nothing else, she would prove his faith in her had been well placed. The first day of school arrived with a clear September sky and a flutter of nervousness in Zara's stomach. She stood at the schoolhouse door in her best dress, one of 3 she'd purchased with her advance salary, and rang the bell that would summon her students. They came in a noisy, curious group, children ranging from 6 to 16, dressed in everything from carefully pressed Sunday clothes to practical homespun. Their faces reflected the diverse heritage of the territory: Hispanic, Anglo, and Native American children, together in the one-room schoolhouse. Good morning, Zara said when they had settled into the rows of desks. I am Miss Reynolds, and I am very pleased to be your teacher. A small girl in the front row raised her hand immediately. Miss Reynolds, did you really fall off a train and get rescued by Mr. Caldwell? Zara blinked, startled by the directness of the question and the revelation that her story or some version of it had circulated through town. I became ill on the train, she corrected gently, sticking to her fabricated tale. Mr. Caldwell was kind enough to help me when I needed to disembark unexpectedly. Another hand shot up. My pa says Mr. Caldwell don't talk to nobody 'cept his horse and his dog. Did he talk to you? Doesn't talk to anyone, Zara automatically corrected. And yes, Mr. Caldwell spoke to me. He was very helpful. A boy at the back snickered. Bet he talked to you plenty. My ma says. That's quite enough, Zara interrupted firmly. Mr. Caldwell is a private person who was kind to me when I needed help. Now, we have a great deal to accomplish today, and very little time for gossip. With that, she launched into her carefully prepared first lesson, grateful when the children's attention shifted to the task at hand. But their questions lingered in her mind, raising her own curiosity about the man who had so dramatically entered and exited her life. Why did the town seem both familiar with Grant and yet so full of speculation about him? What had happened to make him withdraw to his isolated ranch? These questions remained unanswered as days turned into weeks. Zara threw herself into teaching, finding joy in the eager minds of her students and satisfaction in the routine of school life. The townspeople gradually accepted her, inviting her to Sunday dinners and community gatherings. Mayor Wilson praised her methods, and even the most skeptical parents acknowledged their children were learning well under her instruction. Only Victoria Hartford maintained her hostility, pointedly ignoring Zara when they encountered each other in town. Zara tried not to care. The woman's opinion mattered little compared to the success she was finding in her work. But something about Victoria's calculating gaze whenever it fell on her suggested the battle between them was far from over. One evening in early October, as Zara was grading arithmetic papers by lamplight, a knock at her door startled her. Visitors were unusual after dark, and for a brief, hopeful moment, she wondered if Grant had finally returned to town. Instead, she opened the door to find Rusty, Grant's cattle dog, whining anxiously on her doorstep, a folded paper tied to his collar. The dog was dusty and panting hard, as if he had run the entire distance from the ranch. "Rusty?" Zara knelt, untying the note with shaking hands. "What's happened? Where's Grant?" The note was brief, the handwriting uneven. "Injured. Can't ride for help. If Rusty finds you, need doctor. GC." Zara's heart lurched. Without hesitation, she grabbed her shawl and hurried out, Rusty at her heels. The town doctor, an elderly man named Winters, lived just off the main street. She pounded on his door until a sleep-rumpled figure appeared. "Miss Reynolds? What in tarnation?" "It's Grant Caldwell," Zara interrupted, thrusting the note at him. "He's hurt and can't ride for help. We need to go to his ranch immediately." Dr. Winters squinted at the note, then at the anxious dog. "That's a 2-hour ride in daylight, Miss Reynolds, at night, with no moon." "Then we'd better start now," Zara said firmly. "Every minute we delay could matter." The doctor sighed, but nodded. "Give me 5 minutes to gather my supplies. Meet me at the livery stable." 20 minutes later, they were riding out of town, Dr. Winters on his sturdy mare, Zara on a borrowed horse, and Rusty loping ahead, constantly looking back to ensure they were following. The night was cool and dark, with only starlight to guide them along the trail. "You care a great deal for Caldwell," Dr. Winters observed after they had been riding for some time. "He saved my life," Zara replied simply. The doctor gave her a sidelong glance. "That all it is? Gratitude?" Zara didn't answer immediately, the question forcing her to examine feelings she had been avoiding since Grant rode out of Las Cruces weeks ago. "I barely know him," she said finally. "Sometimes that doesn't matter," Winters replied. "My Elizabeth and I had known each other exactly 3 days when I asked her to marry me. 52 years later, still haven't regretted it." They rode in silence after that, Zara's thoughts tumultuous. What did she feel for Grant Caldwell? Gratitude, certainly. Respect for his kindness and integrity. Admiration for his self-sufficiency and quiet strength. And something else. Something that made her heart race when she thought of his rare smile, the way his green eyes softened when he looked at her, the feeling of safety she had found in his arms. But what did it matter? Grant had rescued her, helped her establish herself in Las Cruces, then disappeared back into his solitary life. He clearly valued his isolation. She had no reason to believe he thought of her at all, beyond perhaps wondering if she had succeeded as the town's teacher. Yet he had sent his beloved dog across 30 miles of wilderness with a note that might find its way to her. That had to mean something. The sky was beginning to lighten with pre-dawn gray when they finally reached Grant's ranch. The cabin looked eerily silent, no smoke rising from the chimney despite the morning chill. Rusty raced ahead, barking frantically at the cabin door. Zara dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, rushing to the porch with her heart in her throat. The door was unlatched, swinging open at her touch. Inside, the cabin was cold and dim. "Grant!" she called, fear making her voice sharper than intended. A weak cough answered her from the direction of the bedroom. Zara hurried toward the sound, Dr. Winters close behind. Grant lay on the bed, his face alarmingly pale against the dark blanket. His shirt was torn away, revealing a makeshift bandage around his torso, stained dark with dried blood. "Zara?" he mumbled, his eyes fever-bright as they focused on her. "You came." "Of course I came," she said, moving to his side and taking his hand. It was hot with fever, his skin dry and his pulse rapid under her fingers. "What happened?" "Rustlers," Grant managed. "Shot. Tried to stop them. Taking the north herd." Dr. Winters was already removing the bandage, his experienced hands gentle but efficient. "Bullet went clean through," he reported. "But the wound's infected." "How long ago?" "2 days," Grant said, wincing as the doctor probed the injury. "Thought. Could handle it myself." "Then the fever started?" "You're lucky you're not dead," Winters said bluntly. "Miss Reynolds, I need hot water, clean cloths, and whatever whiskey he has in the house." For the next several hours, Zara worked alongside the doctor, boiling water, preparing poultices, and helping to clean and rebandage the wound. Grant drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes mumbling incoherently as the fever raged. During one lucid moment, he caught Zara's hand as she bathed his face with cool water. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice stronger than it had been. "Not proper." "Propriety is the least of my concerns right now," Zara replied firmly. "You needed help, and I came. That's all that matters." Grant's eyes held hers. "Thought of you," he admitted, his usual reserve perhaps lowered by fever and exhaustion. "These weeks. Wondered if you were happy here." "I am," Zara said softly. "The school is wonderful, the children eager to learn. You were right to bring me to Las Cruces." A ghost of his half-smile touched Grant's lips. "Good," he murmured before his eyes drifted closed again. Dr. Winters returned from washing his hands, his expression serious as he looked at Grant's sleeping form. "The infection's bad," he said quietly to Zara. "I've cleaned the wound as best I can and given him medicine for the fever, but he needs constant care for the next few days. I can't stay. There's a woman near to term with her first child back in town." "I'll stay," Zara said immediately. The doctor raised an eyebrow. "That would raise a few eyebrows in Las Cruces, Miss Reynolds. The schoolteacher alone with a bachelor rancher?" "Then let them raise," Zara replied, lifting her chin. "I won't leave him like this." Winters studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I suspected as much. I'll stop by the McGregor place on my way back to town. They're the closest neighbors. Perhaps Mrs. McGregor could join you here, for propriety's sake, if nothing else." "Thank you," Zara said, grateful for his understanding. After the doctor left, Zara set about making the cabin more comfortable. She built up the fire, prepared a simple broth in case Grant woke hungry, and organized the medicines Winters had left. Then she settled into the chair beside Grant's bed, prepared for a long vigil. As morning stretched into afternoon, Zara found herself talking to the unconscious man, telling him about her students, her adjustment to life in Las Cruces, her hopes and fears for the future. There was something freeing about speaking to someone who couldn't respond, and she found herself confessing things she had told no one else. "I was terrified that first day in the classroom," she admitted. "What if the children hated me? What if I couldn't maintain discipline? What if the parents complained to the council?" She smiled, remembering. "But then this little girl, Maria Gonzalez, brought me a wildflower she'd picked on the way to school. She said it was a welcome gift for her new teacher, and suddenly I wasn't afraid anymore. I remembered why I loved teaching in the first place. Grant stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering but not opening. Zara continued, her voice softer. I've thought about you too, you know. Every time someone new comes to town, I look up hoping it might be you. Silly, isn't it? We barely know each other, and yet... She trailed off, unable to articulate the connection she felt to this man. Not silly, came Grant's hoarse voice, startling her. His eyes were open, clearer than before, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I rode halfway to town 3 times, turned back each time. Why? Zara asked, her heart hammering. Afraid, Grant admitted, the confession seeming to cost him. That you'd settled in. Wouldn't want reminders of how we met. I could never forget how we met, Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. You saved me. In every way a person can be saved. Grant's hand found hers, his grip weak but determined. You saved yourself, he corrected. Jumping from that train took courage. I just happened to be there to catch you. They remained like that, hands linked, eyes held in a gaze that spoke more than words could express, until Grant's eyelids grew heavy again and he drifted back to sleep. This time, his breathing seemed easier, his face less drawn with pain. Mrs. McGregor arrived as the sun was setting, a practical woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner and kind eyes. She took one look at the situation and immediately took charge. You rest, Miss Reynolds, she insisted. I'll watch over Mr. Caldwell for a spell. You've been up all night and day, from the looks of it. Too exhausted to argue, Zara allowed herself to be shooed to the main room, where she collapsed onto the sofa. Despite her intention to rest only briefly, she fell into a deep sleep, the emotional and physical toll of the past 24 hours catching up with her. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and the scent of coffee and bacon filled the cabin. Disoriented, Zara sat up to find Mrs. McGregor at the stove. About time you rejoined the living, the older woman said cheerfully. You've been asleep nearly 12 hours. 12 hours? Zara exclaimed, jumping up. But Grant is doing considerably better, Mrs. McGregor assured her. His fever broke around midnight. He's been asking for you. Zara hurried to the bedroom, pausing in the doorway. Grant was propped up against pillows, still pale but with a clarity in his eyes that had been absent the day before. You're still here, he said, a question in his voice. Did you think I would leave? Zara asked, moving to the bedside. Hoped you wouldn't, Grant admitted. Though you should. Your reputation is the least of my concerns, Zara interrupted. You needed help. Nothing else mattered. Grant's expression softened. The school? Your students? Mayor Wilson is finding a substitute for a few days, Zara explained. Dr. Winters arranged it before he left yesterday. The children will survive without me until you're back on your feet. Zara, Grant began, then hesitated, seeming to struggle for words. I'm not good at this. At saying what I feel? You don't have to say anything, Zara assured him, suddenly afraid of what might follow gratitude perhaps, but nothing more. I do, Grant insisted, because if I've learned anything from nearly dying in this God-forsaken bed, it's that life's too short for regrets. He took a deep breath. I've thought about you every day since I left you in Las Cruces. Told myself it was just concern for your welfare. But it's more than that. Hope bloomed in Zara's chest, but she said nothing, letting him find his way. I've been alone a long time, Grant continued. Convinced myself I preferred it that way. Then you came flying out of that train like some kind of miracle, and suddenly my quiet life seemed empty. Grant, Zara whispered, her voice catching. I'm not asking for anything, he hurried to add. Just wanted you to know, in case it matters to you at all. In answer, Zara leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, tender, a promise rather than a passion, but when she drew back, Grant's eyes were wide with wonder. "Does that answer your question?" Zara asked softly. The corner of Grant's mouth lifted in that half-smile she had come to cherish. "Might need you to explain it again," he murmured. "I'm still a bit feverish. Might have misunderstood." Zara laughed, a sound of pure joy that seemed to brighten the room. "When you're well," she promised, "I'll explain it as many times as necessary." A discreet cough from the doorway reminded them they weren't alone. Mrs. McGregor stood there, her expression a mixture of amusement and approval. "Breakfast is ready," she announced. "And Mr. Caldwell, if you're well enough for such conversations, you're well enough to eat something substantial." Grant recovered slowly but steadily over the following days. Zara divided her time between nursing him back to health and helping Mrs. McGregor with the ranch chores. She learned to milk the cow, feed the chickens, and even rode out with Mr. McGregor to check on the remaining cattle after the rustlers' raid. Each evening, she would sit with Grant as he regained his strength, reading to him from his collection of books or simply talking. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Grant told her about his sister, about the guilt he still carried for not being able to save her. Zara confessed her terror during those moments on the train when she realized her uncle's plans for her, and the desperate courage it had taken to jump. "I never thought I was brave," she admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, Grant now well enough to move to the main room for short periods. "My whole life, I did what was expected of me, taught where I was assigned, wore what was appropriate, said what was proper." "And then you jumped from a moving train," Grant said, admiration clear in his voice. "That's a special kind of bravery. Zara, the kind that comes when you've reached your breaking point and refuse to break." Zara smiled at his understanding. "What about you? What made you choose this life, so far from everything?" Grant was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "After my parents died," he finally said, "people in town started treating me differently, some with pity, which I couldn't stand, others with expectations. Victoria Hartford among them." He shifted uncomfortably. "Her father had always wanted my land for the water rights. Victoria decided marriage would be a simpler acquisition than a business deal. She made her intentions very clear." "And you weren't interested," Zara surmised. "Not in her, not in her father's money, not in the strings that would come attached," Grant confirmed. "When I refused her advances, rumors started that I was strange, unsociable, maybe even dangerous." His expression darkened. "It was easier to just stay out here, do my work, live my life without the complications of town gossip." "Until I complicated everything," Zara said softly. Grant's eyes found hers, warmth replacing the shadows. "Best complication that ever happened to me," he said simply. 2 weeks after Grant's injury, Dr. Winters declared him well enough to manage without constant care. Zara knew she should return to her teaching duties. The substitute had already stayed longer than planned, but the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Grant, filled her with a sense of loss she couldn't articulate. On her last evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. Rusty lay at their feet, occasionally thumping his tail against the wooden boards as if in contentment. "Will you come to town more often now?" Zara asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Grant glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Would you like me to?" "Yes," Zara said simply, honestly. "Very much." Grant reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become familiar during his recovery. "Then I will," he promised, "though I'm not sure how welcomed I'll be by certain members of the community." "You let me worry about Victoria Hartford," Zara said with more confidence than she felt. The rest of the town respects you, even if they don't understand your preference for solitude. They sat in silence again, the purples and golds of sunset giving way to the deep blue of twilight. Stars began to appear, brilliant in the clear desert sky. "I've been thinking," Grant said finally, his voice hesitant, "about the future." Zara's heart quickened. "What about it?" "I like my life here," Grant began carefully. "The quiet, the work, the freedom. But these past weeks—" He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "These past weeks have shown me what I've been missing. A voice besides my own in the house. Someone to share the sunset with. Someone who cares if I live or die." He turned to face her fully, his eyes serious in the fading light. "I'm not asking for an answer now. I know you have your teaching, your life in town that you've built. But if someday, if you might consider a life out here instead." "Are you asking me to marry you, Grant Caldwell?" Zara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Grant's expression was a mixture of hope and fear. "I'm asking if you might someday be open to the idea," he clarified. "It's too soon, I know that. We've known each other barely 2 months. But I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you, and I needed you to know that before you went back to town." Zara's heart felt too full for her chest, emotions overwhelming her ability to speak. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him, not the gentle kiss of a sick room, but a kiss full of promise and passion and possibility. When they finally parted, both breathless, Grant's smile was no longer the half-smile she had first known, but a full expression of joy that transformed his face. "Is that a maybe someday?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "That," Zara replied, "is a yes, when you're ready to ask properly." Grant laughed, the sound carrying across the darkening land. "I'll hold you to that, schoolteacher." The following morning, Grant insisted on riding with Zara back to Las Cruces despite Dr. Winter's warnings about overexertion. "I'm not letting you ride alone," he said firmly as he saddled Scout. "And besides, I have business in town." "What business?" Zara asked, curious. Grant's expression was enigmatic. "You'll see." The ride to town was leisurely, both of them reluctant for it to end. They talked of everything and nothing: Grant's plans to rebuild his herd after the rustlers' theft, Zara's ideas for expanding the school curriculum, the changes coming to the territory as the railroad expanded westward. As they approached Las Cruces, Grant grew quieter, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. Zara reached across the space between their horses to touch his arm. "Whatever happens in town, remember that not everyone believes the gossip." Grant nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Some things are worth facing uncomfortable situations for," he said, his eyes meeting hers briefly. They drew attention immediately upon entering town, curious glances and whispers following their progress down the main street. Zara held her head high, acutely aware that her 2-week absence at Grant's ranch would have fueled speculation regardless of Mrs. McGregor's chaperoning presence. Mayor Wilson was the first to approach them as they dismounted in front of the general store. "Miss Reynolds, Mr. Caldwell, good to see you both. I trust you're recovered from your injuries, sir?" "Well enough, thanks to Miss Reynolds and Dr. Winters," Grant replied, his manner more formal than it had been at the ranch. "Excellent, excellent," Wilson beamed. "The school children will be delighted to have their teacher back. Mrs. Perkins has done her best, but I'm afraid arithmetic has suffered in your absence." As if summoned by the mention of school, several children came running up, surrounding Zara with excited greetings and questions. She laughed, kneeling to receive hugs from the youngest and answering their rapid-fire inquiries as best she could. Over their heads, she caught Grant watching her, his expression soft with an emotion that made her heart flutter. When the children finally dispersed, promising to see her in school the next day, Grant stepped closer. "You're good with them," he observed quietly. "They adore you." "I adore them," Zara replied simply. Teaching isn't just a job for me. It's a calling. Something flickered in Grant's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or concern. Before she could question it, however, Victoria Hartford's voice cut through the pleasant atmosphere. Well, well. The hermit and the schoolteacher returned together. How interesting. She approached with deliberate steps. Her expensive dress and perfectly arranged hair, a stark contrast to Zara's simpler attire and wind-blown appearance after the long ride. Miss Hartford? Grant acknowledged with a curt nod. If you'll excuse us. So eager to avoid conversation, Victoria observed, her painted lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. One might think you have something to hide. Both of you. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but forced herself to remain calm. Nothing to hide at all, Miss Hartford. Mr. Caldwell was injured by rustlers. Dr. Winters and I provided medical care. He's now recovered enough to return to town on business. Really quite straightforward. Victoria's gaze sharpened. 2 weeks of medical care seems excessive, especially for a woman with teaching obligations. The town council might have concerns about such dedication. Grant stepped forward, his expression hardening. If anyone on the council has concerns, they can address them to me directly. Miss Reynolds saved my life at considerable inconvenience to herself. Any suggestion of impropriety is not only false, but disrespectful to a woman who has served this town with integrity since her arrival. The directness of his defense seemed to momentarily disarm Victoria. Before she could respond, Mayor Wilson rejoined them, oblivious to the tension. Ah, Mr. Caldwell, about that business you mentioned in your note, I've prepared the paperwork as requested. If you'd like to step into my office? Note? Zara questioned, turning to Grant in surprise. Grant's expression softened as he looked at her. I sent a message with the McGregors when they returned to their ranch, he explained. There are matters I needed to address in town. Will you wait for me? It shouldn't take long. Still confused but trusting, Zara nodded. I'll check on the schoolhouse while you're busy. I should see what awaits me tomorrow. As Grant walked away with the mayor, Victoria lingered, her calculating gaze moving between Zara and Grant's retreating figure. You think you know him, she said softly, menace beneath the silky tone. You don't. Grant Caldwell has secrets darker than you can imagine. We all have secrets, Miss Hartford, Zara replied evenly. The difference is in how we choose to live with them. With that, she turned and walked toward the schoolhouse, refusing to give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her unsettled. But as she walked, doubt crept in like a shadow. What did she really know about Grant Caldwell? They had spent intense weeks together, shared confidences and kisses, even spoken of a possible future, but there remained unaddressed questions about his past, about the rumors that had driven him to isolation. The schoolhouse was just as she had left it, though Mrs. Perkins had rearranged the readers and left a stack of poorly graded arithmetic papers on the desk. Zara moved about the familiar space, finding comfort in the routine of straightening books and preparing for tomorrow's lessons. She was erasing the previous week's assignments from the blackboard when she heard the door open behind her. Expecting Mrs. Perkins or perhaps one of her students, she turned with a welcoming smile that faltered when she saw Emerson Hartford's imposing figure instead. Mr. Hartford, she acknowledged cautiously. Can I help you? The older man studied her with cold, assessing eyes. I understand you've developed quite an attachment to Grant Caldwell during your time at his ranch. The directness of the statement took Zara aback. Mr. Caldwell and I have become friends, she said carefully. He needed medical assistance, which Dr. Winters and I provided. Hartford's laugh was without humor. Let's not play games, Miss Reynolds. My daughter may be blinded by her own interests, but I see things clearly. You're an intelligent woman. Surely you've asked yourself why a man like Caldwell would choose such isolation? Unease crept up Zara's spine. His preferences are his own business. Are they? Hartford stepped further into the room. What if I told you that 10 years ago, a man was found dead on Caldwell land, shot in the back? Caldwell claimed self-defense, said the man was trespassing, tried to rob him. No witnesses. Case dismissed for lack of evidence. Zara's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. If the case was dismissed, then Mr. Caldwell was innocent under the law. The law? Hartford scoffed. Out here, the law is whatever the strongest man says it is. Caldwell was young, popular. His father had friends in the territorial government. The dead man was a drifter. No one to speak for him. He moved closer, his bulk suddenly threatening in the empty schoolroom. Ask yourself this, Miss Reynolds. Why would a man with nothing to hide bury himself on a remote ranch, avoiding town for months at a time? Why would he reject every attempt at friendship or connection? What kind of man lives that way unless he's running from something? Or from someone, Zara countered, finding her courage. Someone who wants his land and will use any means to get it, including trying to destroy his reputation. Hartford's expression darkened. Be careful, schoolteacher. Your position here depends on the town's good opinion. That can change quickly with the right whispers in the right ears, especially when those whispers involve weeks spent alone at a bachelor's ranch. Are you threatening me, Mr. Hartford? Zara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Warning you, he corrected. For your own good. Caldwell is not the man you think he is, and Las Cruces is not Boston. The frontier has its own rules. With that parting shot, he turned and left, the schoolroom door slamming behind him with ominous finality. Zara sank into her chair, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the encounter. Hartford's allegations were clearly meant to drive a wedge between her and Grant, but was there any truth behind them? Grant had spoken of rumors that drove him to isolation, but had never mentioned a shooting, a death on his property. If it had happened, why hadn't he told her? And if it hadn't, why would Hartford invent such a specific lie? She was still wrestling with these questions when the schoolroom door opened again. This time it was Grant, his expression brightening when he saw her, then shifting to concern as he registered her troubled face. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, crossing to her side. "Zara?" She looked up at him, wanting desperately to dismiss Hartford's insinuations but unable to ignore them entirely. "Did someone die on your land?" she asked directly. "A man shot in the back?" Grant went very still, his face paling slightly beneath his tan. For a long, terrible moment he said nothing, and Zara's heart sank with the implicit confirmation. "Who told you that?" he finally asked, his voice low and controlled. "Emerson Hartford was just here," Zara said. "He implied things about your past, about why you live alone." Grant's expression hardened. "Hartford." He spat the name like a curse. "I should have known he wouldn't let this go." "Then it's true?" Zara pressed, needing to hear it from him. Grant dragged a hand through his hair, his eyes troubled. "Not the way he told it, I'd wager," he said finally. "Yes, a man died on my land. 8 years ago, not 10. And he wasn't shot in the back. He was shot facing me, with his own gun aimed at my chest." Relief flooded through Zara, followed immediately by shame for doubting him. "What happened?" Grant sank into one of the student desks, suddenly looking weary. "It was during the drought of '70. Water was scarce everywhere. My spring was one of the few that hadn't dried up. Hartford sent men to divert the water to his property, not asking, not offering payment, just taking what wasn't his." His eyes met hers, asking for understanding. "I confronted them. Most backed down when they realized I was serious about defending my land. But one, a hired gun named Tucker, decided I was an obstacle easily removed. He drew on me. I was faster." "Self-defense," Zara said softly. "Clear as day." Grant nodded. "Sheriff investigated. Territorial judge dismissed the case without even a trial. But Hartford couldn't accept that his water grab had failed so spectacularly. He started the rumors that Tucker was just passing through, that I shot him without warning, that I was dangerous. He looked down at his hands. Most people knew it was nonsense, but Hartford has influence. Money. Eventually, it was easier to just withdraw. Limit my time in town. Focus on my ranch. And Victoria? Zara asked. A grim smile touched Grant's lips. Victoria decided I was a challenge, or perhaps she thought I'd be easier to manipulate than her father had found me. Either way, she made her intentions clear about 3 years ago. And when you rejected her? The rumors got worse, Grant confirmed. Suddenly, I wasn't just potentially dangerous, I was strange. Unnatural. A man who preferred animals to people must have something wrong with him. Anger rose in Zara's chest, not at Grant, but at the Hartfords, at the petty cruelty that had driven a good man to isolation. Why didn't you tell me this before? Grant's expression was pained. Because I wanted you to know me first. Not the rumors, not the past. Just me. The man I am now. And because I was afraid. Afraid of what? That you would look at me differently, Grant admitted softly. That something would change in your eyes when you knew I had taken a life, even in self-defense. That maybe you'd wonder if Hartford was right about me after all. Zara rose from her chair and crossed to him, taking his face between her hands. Nothing could change how I see you, she said firmly. You are the man who caught me when I was falling, who helped me build a new life, who sends his dog 30 miles through the wilderness rather than die alone. Grant's hands came up to cover hers, his eyes searching her face for any sign of doubt or fear. Finding none, he pulled her close, burying his face against her shoulder. I don't deserve you, he whispered. That's not for you to decide, Zara replied, running her fingers through his hair. Now, what was this business with Mayor Wilson that was so important? Grant pulled back, something like nervous excitement replacing the shadow in his eyes. I filed a town business license, he said, for a lumber mill. A lumber mill? Zara repeated, surprised. Grant nodded. There's a stand of pine on the north end of my property, good straight trees that could be milled for building. Las Cruces is growing. People need lumber. Right now, it all comes from up north at considerable expense. But your ranch? Zara asked, trying to understand this unexpected development. I'll keep the ranch, Grant assured her. But a mill would mean regular business in town, employees eventually, a reason to be less isolated. He hesitated, then added, a reason for a certain schoolteacher to not have to choose between her calling and a life 30 miles from town. Zara's breath caught as she realized what he was saying, that he was willing to change his life, to step out of his hard-won isolation, for her. Grant, I never asked you to. You didn't have to, he interrupted gently. I watched you with those children earlier. Your face lights up when you teach. I would never ask you to give that up. So instead, I'm finding a way to be closer to your world while still keeping mine. Tears pricked at Zara's eyes. When did you decide this? The night you kissed me on the porch, Grant admitted. I knew then that I would do whatever it took to make a future with you possible. If that means facing Hartford's rumors and rebuilding my place in this town, so be it. Zara threw her arms around him, overcome with emotion. Grant held her close, his strength a comfort and a promise. Mayor Wilson thinks it's an excellent idea, he continued when she pulled back. Says the town has needed a local lumber source for years. He's already offered a plot of land near the river for the mill site. Hartford won't be pleased, Zara observed. Hartford can go to hell, Grant said bluntly, then immediately looked chagrined. Pardon my language. Zara laughed, the tension of the day breaking. I've heard worse in the schoolyard, she assured him. But you're right, the Hartfords won't make this easy for you. For us. Nothing worth having comes easy, Grant replied, his eyes serious. And you, Zara Reynolds, are very much worth having. The following weeks brought rapid change to both their lives. Zara resumed her teaching duties, welcomed back enthusiastically by her students. Grant divided his time between his ranch and town, working with Mayor Wilson to secure financing for the lumber mill and hiring men to begin clearing the mill site by the river. As Grant had predicted, the Hartfords did everything in their power to obstruct his plans, questioning his business acumen at town meetings, suggesting the mill would pollute the river, even attempting to persuade the territorial bank to withdraw its loan commitment. But Grant's straightforward approach and obvious knowledge of the lumber business gradually won over the skeptics. More surprising was the town's reaction to their courtship, which they made no attempt to hide. Rather than the scandal Victoria had clearly hoped for, most of Las Cruces seemed delighted by the romance between their schoolteacher and the once reclusive rancher. Mrs. Fletcher declared it better than a dime novel, and Mayor Wilson took to winking conspiratorially whenever he saw them together. By Christmas, the foundation for the mill had been laid, and Grant was spending more nights at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house than at his ranch. The distance between their worlds was closing, day by day, choice by choice. On Christmas Eve, the town gathered for its annual celebration in the newly constructed church. Pine boughs decorated every surface, their fresh scent mingling with cinnamon and candle wax. Children performed a nativity play, carols were sung, and Mayor Wilson delivered a speech about growth and community that managed to mention Grant's mill project 3 separate times. After the festivities, Grant and Zara walked through the town, snow crunching beneath their boots. The stars seemed impossibly bright in the clear winter sky, and the silence of the desert night wrapped around them like a blanket. "I have something for you," Grant said, as they reached the schoolhouse where Zara had asked to stop to collect some papers. "A Christmas gift." "We agreed to exchange gifts tomorrow," Zara protested, though curiosity brightened her eyes. "This one can't wait," Grant replied, a nervous edge to his voice that made Zara's heart beat faster. Inside the schoolhouse, the moonlight spilled through the windows, casting everything in silver and shadow. Grant lit a lamp, then turned to face Zara with an expression she had never seen before: vulnerable, hopeful, afraid. "These past months have been the happiest of my life," he began, his voice deeper than usual. "Even with Hartford's interference, even with the challenges of starting the mill, even with the distance between the ranch and town. Every moment with you has been a gift I never expected to receive." Zara's breath caught as Grant reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I told you once that I wasn't good at saying what I feel," he continued. "I'm still not. But I hope my actions have shown you what my words cannot." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small, perfect diamond. "This was my mother's," he said softly. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman who brought light into my life the way she brought light into my father's." Grant sank to one knee, his green eyes never leaving hers. "Zara Reynolds, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Zara's eyes, blurring the sight of this strong, gentle man kneeling before her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Grant Caldwell, I will marry you." Grant's hand shook slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. Then he was standing, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke of relief and joy and promises kept. When he set her down, his lips found hers in a kiss that sealed their commitment as surely as any vow. "When?" he asked when they finally parted, both breathless and laughing. "Spring," Zara decided. "When the desert blooms, it seems fitting." "Spring it is," Grant agreed, holding her close. "Though that's a very long time to wait." Zara smiled up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she felt. Good things are worth waiting for, she reminded him. And you, Grant Caldwell, are very much worth waiting for. Spring came to the New Mexico territory in a riot of color-yellow brittlebush, purple lupine, and the fiery blooms of ocotillo painting the desert landscape. The lumber mill was nearly operational, with the first cut planned for the week after the wedding. Grant had built a small house near the mill site, though they planned to split their time between town and the ranch, especially during school holidays. The wedding took place on a perfect April day, with the entire town in attendance. Mayor Wilson officiated, beaming with proprietary pleasure as he pronounced them husband and wife. Even the Hartfords were present, though Victoria's smile was brittle and her father's congratulations notably brief. As Zara and Grant walked back down the aisle together, she caught a glimpse of Rusty waiting patiently outside the church, a blue ribbon tied to his collar in honor of the occasion. The sight made her laugh with pure joy. "What?" Grant asked, smiling down at her as they stepped into the sunshine. "Just thinking about how different my life would be if I hadn't jumped from that train," Zara replied. "If you hadn't been there to catch me." Grant's arm tightened around her waist. "Your running ended there, in my arms," he said softly, echoing the words he had called to her all those months ago. "And mine ended the moment I saw you." As they moved toward the waiting crowd of well-wishers, Zara knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Not in Boston teaching properly behaved young ladies, not in Santa Fe, married to her uncle's business associate, but here in this small desert town with this quiet, honorable man who had caught her when she was falling and never let her go. Their story had begun with an act of desperate courage and a moment of unexpected kindness. It would continue with challenges and joys, victories and setbacks, but always with the certainty that they faced each day together the schoolteacher and the cowboy, who had found in each other the home they had both been seeking. 5 years later, on a warm summer evening, Grant sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Zara told a story to their children, 4-year-old James and 2-year-old Elizabeth. The lumber mill was thriving, providing employment for a dozen men and materials for the growing town. The ranch had recovered from the rustlers' raid, with a herd now twice its original size. Emerson Hartford had died the previous winter, leaving his empire to Victoria, who had surprised everyone by selling most of the properties and moving east to pursue a new life away from the memories and disappointments of Las Cruces. Before she left, she had come to the mill, asking to speak with Grant alone. "I wanted to apologize," she had said stiffly, "for the rumors, for trying to drive you away, for everything." Grant had been too shocked to respond immediately, which Victoria had apparently interpreted as rejection. "You don't have to forgive me," she'd added quickly. "I just needed to say it before I left." "I do forgive you," Grant had replied finally, "and I wish you happiness in your new life." Victoria had studied him for a long moment. "You're different now," she observed. "Less guarded. Marriage agrees with you." "Zara agrees with me," Grant had corrected gently. "She makes me better than I am alone." A flicker of what might have been regret had crossed Victoria's face before she nodded and turned to go. "Goodbye, Grant Caldwell. Take care of your family." Now, watching as Zara gathered their sleepy children for bedtime, Grant reflected on how completely his life had changed since that day he'd spotted a desperate young woman jumping from a train. His quiet, isolated existence had given way to a home filled with laughter, occasional chaos, and more love than he had ever imagined possible. Zara emerged from the children's room a short while later, settling onto the porch swing beside him with a contented sigh. "They want Papa to finish the story," she reported. "Something about how the cowboy saves the princess from the dragon." Grant chuckled. I think James is confusing his fairy tales. Maybe, Zara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. Or maybe he just knows his father is capable of any heroic feat required. Including dragon slaying? Grant asked skeptically. Especially dragon slaying, Zara confirmed. She took his hand, her fingers tracing the calluses earned through years of hard work. You slayed my dragons, gave me a home when I had nowhere to go, a purpose when I was lost, a family when I thought I would always be alone. Grant turned to kiss her forehead, overwhelmed as always by the depth of his feeling for this remarkable woman. You did the same for me, he reminded her. I was barely living before you came flying into my life. Zara smiled at the memory. Your running ends here, in my arms. She quoted softly, best promise anyone ever made to me. And I intend to keep it, Grant assured her, drawing her closer as the desert sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. For the rest of our lives. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the land they both had come to love. Inside, their children waited for stories of adventure and courage. And here on the porch, the schoolteacher and the cowboy held each other close, grateful for the leap of faith that had brought them together and the love that had transformed both their lives.